Often when you're being targeted for harassment, it's going to be by your boss or from your boss. And that could create a situation where you're really socially isolated for a lot of reasons. Your peers may be getting feedback from your boss that there's something wrong with you, and they may just stay away from you because they know that there's friction between you and your boss. Your boss who's targeting you may spread some lies about you. I remember when I was in high school, and I was not a big guy. I wasn't a small guy, but I wasn't a big guy, and I was a good target for the bigger guys to. I didn't get bullied a lot, but if they were going to rough somebody up a little bit, they knew they could handle me. But I wasn't too small, but I was targeted for bullying by this one guy who's on the football team, and it wasn't a big deal. Not much came of it, but there was one time when he kind of pushed me, and I stood my ground, and we got into a little bit of a tussle. I wouldn't even call it a fight. We just kind of went back and forth a little bit. Then it was over. And honestly, the bullying was over at that point too. I kind of stood my ground. I guess there's a lesson in there. There wasn't too much going on with that particular incident. Anyway, after we had our little tussle and we walked away, I thought it was over. And I had one of the girls in school say to me, "Why did you pick a fight with him?" And it just shocked me. And it was a lesson learned that he was telling people that I picked a fight with him and not the other way around. So it's kind of interesting. So that's what the bosses who are bullying, who are harassing people, are probably going to do. They're going to talk to the people who are around you and kind of let them know that you're the problem. Now, if you think about the power dynamic, the people, they're just humans, they're going to probably side with the boss because that's where the power is and that's where their career is. And unless they really know you, that's where they're going to lean to. And you can find yourself isolated. If you do find yourself isolated like that, and there's nobody at work who you can really talk to, and you don't want, if you're getting harassed, you don't want to share too much information with people around you because you don't want to be perceived as gossiping. But it can make it difficult to work as well, and it could have a mental toll on yourself. I would recommend, if that happens, that you reach out to, most companies have an associate assistant program where you can get some counseling that's anonymous to the company. It's not from the company, it's from an insurance program, and they normally give you X number of sessions for free, and they could help you kind of sort things out. If you have professional friends, if you have a mentor, it's that this is a perfect thing to talk to them about. If you have friends who are professional, you could bounce it off them. Clergy, if you are religious. I'm very fortunate. My best friend is my wife, and I bounce everything off of her, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And she helps me through a lot of things. So that's where you go if you need help, if you need to work out the emotional part, the mental anguish of it. Um, Human resources is not the place to go for counseling. They're not your friends. There are good people there. There's some people maybe that are not so good, but they're not the place to go for counseling. So just a couple of statistics: 81% of bullies are managers. Maybe no shocker there, but the power dynamic certainly sets itself up for that. No surprise for me either that 50% of the bullies, it's kind of evenly balanced, are either men or women. So it's not that either gender um, is more prone to be a bully or not. It's split kind of even. And I've seen that in my career as well. Um, One thing, this statistic is a little bit higher than I would have thought, but that's probably my own bias and my own experience. 82% of the targets are women, so that's an interesting statistic as well. Um, so you're going to have to deal with human resources. They're not the place to go for counseling. But you are going to have to deal with them because that's part of the process of dealing with harassment. So, as I said before, read the manual. Read the friggin' manual, as we say in IT, RTFM. Read the whole manual. Definitely read the parts about harassment, understand the HR process, and you have to understand your responsibilities in it because you have responsibilities. So read it. I'm not going to go through what the typical responsibilities are, and it is about reporting. It's about doing your job, communicating it, being professional, but it's going to be detailed in your manual. If you haven't read it before, and HR is going to assume that you have, read it and know it and be prepared to answer for it. And really understand that HR is not your friend. They're not your counselor. They work for the company. I've I've had lunch for years with friends, quote unquote friends, work friends from human resources. When I'm dealing with work matters in HR, I do not consider them my friend. I consider them someone I'm working for the same company with. And, we're playing our roles, but they are not my friend. They have a job to do and they're doing it. And people respond to that in very different ways. HR's job is primarily to protect the company. They will define their job in many, many different ways. And a lot of it is to, empower a workforce, but it's to support the company. And they're always going to try to protect the company from lawsuits and protect the company from having issues expand. In many ways, if you're being harassed by your manager, and if your manager's a senior manager or an executive, they're really going to protect that person because they're probably adding value to the company that they want to protect. So when you're going to have to deal with HR, the manual, the HR, some they're either employee handbooks, associate handbooks, whatever they're called. That's going to be your guide to how you're going to engage with HR. You have to understand it, so read through it and prepare. You can't over prepare for it. Don't go into HR trying to wing it. So you've got to spend a little bit of time. And when I'm dealing with HR on any sort of employee issue, I always make sure that I've got a notepad with me. And before I go in, I prepare and I bullet out on that notepad what I want to talk about, what the topic is, what the case I'm trying to make is, if I'm trying to make a case. And I stick to those when I'm in the meeting. Since I always have a notebook with me and I'm always taking notes, it's not looked at twice when I show up with a notepad and a pen and paper, and I just happen to have my bullets in front of me, and I keep looking at them to make sure I'm not going away from those bullets. I don't want to start complaining about something and go down a rabbit hole. I don't want to get off topic at all. That's not going to bode well for me. You want to be very careful about that. So with HR, don't delay. Follow the process. So if you're right now currently being harassed or you feel you're being bullied by your boss, if you haven't read that handbook and you don't understand it, read it now, right now, and follow the timeline and the process. And don't assume that you're a special case. Even if you are friends with people in HR, don't assume you're going to be treated any differently than what's documented in that handbook. I've seen people walked out the door because they assume that, and whether it's an harassment issue or not. So the other thing is, when you walk into HR, nothing is off the record. Even if they say it, just between you and me, they can't, they're not allowed to assume everything that you're saying is being recorded. I would recommend, unless if it's violating your HR policy, and if you're in a state like New York where you can record a conversation, I would record it, as I spoke about in a previous session, like a USB recorder that Tim used. So I would do that, but don't ever assume that anything you're going to say is going to just stay between you and the person you're speaking to. Matter of fact, if you're in a state like New York, they may be recording the conversation. So think of it that way, and it's going to get replayed back to everybody. So I always think of them as a prosecuting lawyer. I always think of them as they're trying to trip me up, or they're trying to see if I missed a step. And in thinking that way, I kind of keep myself in a good place. So a few real life examples. The first, Tim who I've been mentoring talk to me about. Uh, they can be, HR can be quick to terminate people. Now, Tim had somebody working for him. This person wasn't a star, wasn't someone who was on a great trajectory, but she was a steady Eddie. She was the type of person that was getting a job done, no problem. Showed up to work on time, got all of her work done before she left, never had an issue. She just wasn't someone who was taking on more responsibility and was on a growth track for Tim's org. Now, this person had an opportunity presented to her. They actually came to her within another team, within another department, and she took it. And Tim supported that because it was growth for her and thought, great. But what happened was she struggled. And there were parts of a job that she wasn't quite sure how to execute on. And she went to her manager and said, hey, I'm struggling with these things. I need help. Her manager went to HR. HR called her in and she said the same thing. And what she was probably looking for was training or, maybe a little extra one-on-one time, something like that to get that process, whatever she was missing, taken care of. But what HR did was they told her, thanks for coming in. Go back to your desk and what you just said to me, send to me in an email. And she did it, thinking, great, this is going to get me help. Next thing she knew, she was called back into HR and they said, we understand you can't fulfill the role of your job, and we're going to take this email as a resignation and we accept it. And she was walked out the door. It's pretty rough, but that's what HR did. Also, they may seek to find problems based on their own biases. They're humans. And Tim was dealing with HR again within his organization. He got called in because one of the people on his team, single guy, was seen by this HR person having lunch just about every day with different female employees. So she took it upon herself to follow him. And what was happening was he was going to different people during his break time and asking them if they wanted to go to lunch. And they happened to be female employees and he was a male. And the HR manager, interviewed the woman that he spoke to. And what happened was he would ask them to lunch. Say, would you like to go to lunch down in the cafeteria? And they would either say yes or no. If they said yes, they'd go to lunch. No big deal. If they said no, he'd said, okay, and he'd walk away. And every single one of them, and this is per the HR manager, every single one of them said, I didn't feel uncomfortable at all. I didn't feel uncomfortable seeing him in the hallway, and we remained our friendly working relationship. The HR manager was talking to Tim about this employee sexually harassing the females in the office. Tim's response was exactly as mine would have been. Number one, he wasn't. He followed our process. He walked away when they said no. Nobody objected. The only person who's objecting is you. And by the way, you stalked him. You followed him around. For what reason? So he got himself into a little bit of trouble. You probably don't want to say those things to HR. Tim is a pretty confident person. So HR folks are human. They have their personal biases and they may look for problems based on those biases. I've also seen my own personal experience where some people in HR are not honest. And the example that I have is through my career, I've had to terminate people myself based on performance. Every single one has been based on performance. What I've seen some HR people, and it's more than one, but I've seen them do it consistently, is after I make the case, they either add on while they're talking to the employee and terminating, or they add to their file afterwards things that are not true. I don't know why exactly they do it. It is dishonest. I objected to it whenever I saw it. Sometimes I had it removed. Sometimes I was not successfully able to have it removed. But it was dishonest. I believe the reason why they were doing it was to try to make an ironclad case for cause. Now, I work in a at-will employment state. they don't need to do that, but they felt the need to do it, and it is dishonest. And there are some HR people that will not be honest. So you just want to be aware of that. They're people, they have their failings, and unfortunately we have to deal with them when we're dealing with HR. So I think a little bit of paranoia is okay. I'm not trying to scare you, other than scare you to take action. You have to work with them. You have to follow their process. That's a condition of employment. Don't assume that whatever you bring them, they're going to agree with you. I'm sure when you're making your case, if you do what I recommend and bullet out what you want to talk to them about, I'm sure it's very logical to you. They may be coming at it from a protecting the company perspective, and they may disagree with you, and it may take you off balance. No matter what they say, no matter what they do, you have to remain professional. Stand your ground, be honest, but you have to remain professional. So if you need to, consult a lawyer. If you feel you need to. Lawyers will typically, my experience, will tell you if it's something they need to engage with. They might also tell you that, yeah, you've got a case, but I'm not going to take it. So consult a lawyer and follow that path if you feel you need to. And you may very well when you're being harassed at work. As I said before, if you need to, from more the mental perspective, reach out elsewhere for help, for counseling, for support. You may not be able to get it within the confines of your work environment. No matter what happens, never sign anything. And like that person Tim worked with who sent an email to HR, she should have thought 2 or 3 times before she clicked send on that email. So never feel pressure to sign anything. And sending an email is the same as signing things. I'm sure legally there are differences, but it's going to be the same thing. So you want to be careful about whatever you're committing to with HR. If I've seen harassment complaints turn into warnings for the person who reported the harassment. And in the warnings, I've seen some pretty dishonest things. So you want to be careful about that. And often they'll have you sign the warnings, and you don't want to sign something you don't agree with. So the bottom line here is, no matter what happens with HR, you have to follow the process. Be prepared. Make sure you know what you want to bring them. Be succinct. Stick to those bullet points, that topic. Don't go down any rabbit holes. Be honest. Remain calm. Stay professional no matter what happens. You can vent, you can scream, you can cry after the meeting, after you meet with HR. Go to your car and yell, but not in the office. I've seen people get upset. I've seen people cry. It never works out in their favor, 0% of the time. I've seen people cry, and honestly, I've seen people cry trying to elicit sympathy. Sometimes it's you can't help it. You break down. I understand that, and you have my sympathy if that happens. It's not going to help you in HR. But I've seen people try to use that to elicit sympathy, and it never works. 0. So things to think about with HR. Be careful. I'm going to have one more session on kind of next steps. What do you do after you've been through this and you've been trying to manage your boss, you've been trying to manage the HR process? Now what do I do? And I'll also post some links in that final session where you can go to for help and for guidance. I'll probably also post my email. I am doing none of this for money. But if I could be of any help, I'm hoping these videos will help somebody out. And if I can be any help and you email me, I'll do the best I can, point you in the right direction, give you any experience, any guidance I can from my experience. So I will talk to you in the next video.